Ladies and gentlemen, class is now in session. Get out your textbooks, put your rulers away. You throw an paper airplane and I'll have you suspended. But here we go. It is time for Perfect Madness Wrestling's rendition of Wrestling History 101. I am your professor, the Walking Wrestling Encyclopedia, Chris Daria. Not the WWE Chris Daria, because I still don't want to be sued. Still don't want to be sued. Not a fan. Don't want it. Vince McMahon, I'll meet you as a fan, not as a defendant. Today's lesson, our second class of our series here that Perfect Madness Wrestling is producing, is going to take a look at another very topical issue. Last week, we talked about John Cena, the face that runs the place, as it were. Today, we're going to be talking about an entire group of performers that have been getting a lot of attention recently, and that would be the women, the divas, whoever you want to call them. I'm talking about women's wrestling as a whole. There's a lot of rich history to women's wrestling. I've been looking at it all week in preparation for this. I was very surprised at some of the stuff that I found out. I think it was very interesting to see how this has grown from where it started, however long it did, up to now, to the point where in 2015, there has been this massive Divas revolution, as they've been calling it. The Give Divas a Chance movement trended worldwide on Twitter. If I had a Twitter, I would think that was more impressive than I do, but I still think it's pretty impressive because I think that women's wrestling has not been given a due until now. And you can kind of see back in history kind of how things started, how things progressed, why this revolution was primed to take place in 2015. In order to understand how it took place in 2015, I got to go back just about 80 years, though, to the 1930s and 1940s. This is when it all really started, and there are three names that you have to know around this time period that really began and really started to move the needle forward, and only two of these names are women. The two women would be one that everybody knows, Mae Young. Before she became a 70-year-old horn dog, she was considered one of the premier women's wrestlers on the planet. Her rival and friend and confidant throughout this whole process was someone named Mildred Burke. Mildred Burke is the second name you should know. Mildred Burke, also around this time period, one of the more prolific female wrestlers, as they were called at the time, lady wrestlers, to be a part of this community. And the third person to know is actually Mildred Burke's husband, followed by ex-husband, Billy Wolf. Billy Wolf was a promoter, a manager, and a trainer of wrestlers, and he was very much also married, like I said, to Mildred Burke, and through their partnership, were able to get women's wrestling bigger on the map in different territories. These two were very active in the territory days. They faced each other many times, either as Mae Young or Johnny Mae Young, which was her real name. And Mae Young and Mildred Burke not only faced each other, they also main evented in different territories. I was just recently listening and doing some research on the Ross Report, Jim Ross's podcast, and if you missed today's episode being Wednesday, a gentleman by the name of Brian Solomon, who is a author and a wrestling historian, wrote a book called Pro Wrestling FAQ. It's just, you all check it out. It looks pretty cool. And this book details everything about various aspects, like what I'm doing in this series. And he talks about women's wrestling and how it used to be a huge, big main event. People would come in all over. It would draw money to see Mildred Burke go up against Mae Young. Big time. There was all over the NWA, any of the territories within the National Wrestling Alliance were all very active with this. Kind of pissing some of the boys off a little bit. It was very much a boys' club, even more so back then in the 30s and 40s than it was now. This is World War II era. The women are inspired by images of Rosie the Riveter doing the We Can Do It thing, and they want to get out there and do stuff. And then when the boys get back from the war, they want to get their normal place back. And dynamics have kind of shifted, and they are not happy with the fact that this is going on. However it is, and not only are they main eventing, they're also training. A lot of wrestlers of the day have been trained by Mae Young and Mildred Burke and Billy Wolf, this whole crew that was going around. Two of the more notable ones would be a woman by the name of June Byers, another very prolific female wrestler of that era, and one that you guys probably know, a woman by the name of the fabulous Moolah. Moolah is a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful person. I think that she does a great job with her, with the work that she had done in what she was talking about. So yeah, she was excellent in her work. She did a wonderful job going through that. And she was actually trained by May and Mildred. And they did a really wonderful thing in that. Around the 50s, the empire that Mildred Burke built eventually crumbled, and I believe it was a nasty split between her and Billy Wolfe. And because of this split, she wound up retiring, and the boys kind of took their place back as the main attraction and relegating lady wrestling to the side entertainment, the sideshow, as it were. Definitely more of a side act, as akin to what was known back then as midget wrestling or little people wrestling. That was kind of the sideshow, what it eventually became. However, they were still training, they were still doing their thing, the women were, and Mr. Vincent J. McMahon, as he incorporated the WWF, the Worldwide Wrestling Federation, and took that out of the control of the NWA, decided that female wrestling still had a part in his shows, and instituted a women's championship, which was won in a 13-woman battle royal by the Fabulous Moolah. Fabulous Moolah became the centerpiece of the women's division for years. Years and years and years. Her first professional match was in 1949. And then in 1956, she wins this honor, this title, this championship. And she defends it for 28 years. Single reign. That's like, I don't even know how many years that is. Like 10,000 days is what that is. Now, there might have been some title changes that are unrecognized by the WWE today, which is all right. It happens. It's been done in pretty much every title in existence. But on the record books, it says she held the title for 28 days. And it was ended in 1984. Until then, women's wrestling was still seen as this kind of sideshow. I mean, you have other women like Leilani Kai and a few other people that Moolah trained and took on and gave there. So she would normally wrestle with this group of women, Leilani Kai being a major part of that, whereas Burke had retired, June Byers had retired, Mae Young remained friends with Moolah, but I think left to train, wasn't particularly active in the middle of the century. She is definitely was doing some stuff there with the training. And then all the way up until the 80s, you get the boom of rock and wrestling. This is a big boom. This is a big, big period for women's wrestling and for wrestling in general, because this is around the time that icons of pop culture get involved. I mean, we all know about Mr. T. We all know about Liberace and Muhammad Ali and people like that at the first WrestleMania. But one of the big purveyors of that was a woman by the name of Cyndi Lauper, a pop star who was known for crazy hair, wild clothes, and two great songs, Girls Just Want to Have Fun, and of course, True Colors. Great, great songs. And they ran an angle with her and Captain Lou Albano going up against, bringing in Wendy Richter, an up-and-coming superstar who had been around in the time period, an up-and-coming women's performer, who was kind of like the new face, whereas you had the old face or the old guard in the Fabulous Moolah. It was time for them to end it out. So at the Brawl to End It All, I believe was the name of the show, in 1984, Wendy Richter, with the help and aid of Captain Lou Albano and Cyndi Lauper, end the 28-year reign of the Fabulous Moolah, ushering in rock and wrestling. She really, really, really put that on the map, did Wendy Richter. It was a major part of that. She would defend her title against people like Leilani Kai, who she traded it off and on with, and other performers at the time, such as Rockin' Robin and Sherry Martel, and folks of that era. Those are some of the big names of back then. Rockin' Robin, actually the sister of one Jake the Snake Roberts. Sherry Martel, known all across the globe as Sensational Sherry, Scary Sherry, Sister Sherry, depending on where she was at the time. Then you get to, and the Fabulous Moolah was still in the picture. Actually, she was so in the picture that she caused probably what has been known as the original screw job. Back in the late 80s, or mid 80s, I should say, there was a match between Wendy Richter, who was champion, and a woman known as the Spider Woman, Spider Lady, I believe she was called. This was a journey woman wrestler, kind of, I guess, akin to a Mr. X or just a journey woman, a jobber kind of person. And this was a character that was always around. She was getting a championship match. So this championship match happens, and throughout the match, Spider Lady gets a pin on Wendy Richter, but it was not planned. She held her down, and they counted to 3. And Wendy Richter jumps up irate because she was supposed to win the match, rips off the Spider Lady's mask, and it's the Fabulous Moolah. It was never the Fabulous Moolah in that costume. She had never played this character before. She was always herself, the Fabulous Moolah. And Wendy Richter just went enraged. This was a scheme concocted by Vincent K. McMahon now, the Fabulous Moolah, because they weren't sure if Wendy Richter was going to stay on or contract disputes, whatever. Those are the usual things that cause screw jobs, right? We can do a whole thing about Montreal, but here's the original one right here, 1986 or 87. The original screw job of Wendy Richter getting screwed by the Fabulous Moolah and Vince McMahon. She had stopped work. She never spoke to Moolah again. She quit wrestling. She quit the WWE and didn't come back until 2010 when she got inducted into the Hall of Fame. Meanwhile, Moolah goes on to have a great career and a nice rivalry still with sensational Sherry Martel. Now, around this time, you also have the birth of another wrestling construct, another use of women, not just in wrestling, but as valets. And probably the most famous valet that we can talk about is Miss Elizabeth, the then wife of Macho Man Randy Savage, ooh yeah, who this podcast is partially named after. Macho Man had Miss Elizabeth, and she was presented as a valet. She didn't get into the action. She was a very, very gorgeous, pretty woman. Not to say that the other performers at the time weren't pretty. I consider Wendy Richter to be quite attractive. Not to say that the others weren't, but they were presented as tough women. She was presented as a lady, as the first lady of wrestling, as a woman, refined, wearing dresses. Macho Man Randy Savage would hold the rope open for her, all of this sort of stuff. She was very into that sort of vibe when it came down to that area, And that's the vibe she threw out. She never got in the ring. She barely took her clothes off. I think she took off a glove in the 80s or hiked her skirt up a little bit to send the men into a frenzy. But that was the kind of the beginning of a new direction for women's performers, and that was this more sexual, revered take to give to them. And you see them more as that. She was kind of the forebearer of that. And while Sensational Sherry did wrestle, she eventually took off to become a valet as well, but in a different way. She was the kind of valet that would beat you up just as much as the men would, because she knew how to wrestle. She was tough. She was very big into that. She carried a brick in her purse. She slapped the crap out of everybody. She was that kind of valet. So it's two different schools of valet, and all this while, women's wrestling is starting to go by the wayside. The last champion of this era was a woman by the name of Rockin' Robin, Jake the Snake's sister, as we talked about. And Jake's sister was the last champion, the last women's champion in 1990 before she was released. And at this point, the WWE was pushing the women as valets as opposed to as legitimate tough competitors, saving that role for the men. So as they were valets, there wouldn't need to be a champion because nobody was competing. It was Sensational Sherry was a valet. Miss Elizabeth was a valet. It was that sort of thing, that sort of environment. This kept going on. This kind of fell by the wayside until 1993. That was when the new generation was starting to take into effect, moving away from the rock and wrestling era. And one of the things to inject fresh blood into this new era, in the absence of people like Savage and Hogan and Warrior and these these big buff guys that were there, was to bring back women's wrestling and focus back on the technical side of women's wrestling. So you had people like Alundra Blaze, Medusa Miceli, as she was known before, coming in to do this sort of work and to come in. But then you also get a lot of international stars coming in. From Canada, we have Luna Vachon, one of the crazier women ever to be in wrestling. Her family is legitimately insane. She was partnered with Goldust for quite a while, but Luna came in during this time period, as did a number of folks from Japan. Rhonda Singh, a.k.a. Bertha Faye, being one of them, and another one being Bull Nakano, a technical wizard. She was amazing at what she did. So many people today claim her as an inspiration, especially Paige, who uses her submission, the Scorpion Crosslock, a.k.a. the PTO, to make it happen, to end her matches. And these women, others from Japan came over as well, Aja Kong being a big one. And when you think about legitimately tough, legitimately strong women's competitors, Aja Kong should jump to the top of that list. She was amazing. She was out of control. Her theme song alone was enough to scare you. And she was one of the best. And she came in for a quick shot to feud with Alundra Blaze. Unfortunately, one of them wound up getting hurt. That didn't happen. This time period is plagued by a lot of misfortune for the women. Rhonda Singh was a legitimate tough person. She was given the trailer park gimmick of Bertha Faye. Still won a title, still did all that, but definitely could not live up to where she was. And you got masterpieces with Nakano and Blaze. Those were definitely things that happened, and there was definitely a lot of great feuds leading into this sort of thing. But again, like I said, not the best of luck. Bull Nakano got caught with possession of cocaine, sent off. She left. With no one really to challenge after Bertha Faye and leaving Luna, Alundra Blaze wound up leaving as well, retiring the women's championship yet again in about 1996. Now, throughout this time period in WWE, not only was women's wrestling coming back, but the idea of valets was coming back. And there was only one person that you can think of as the great valet in this time period. That was Sunny. She came in with her then husband, Chris Candido, rest in peace, as Skip, and Tom Pritchard as Zip, the Body Donnas, a Simon Dean-like group that was obsessed with making people fit and telling people how much better they were than them. And Sunny was such a huge part of that. She skyrocketed all the way up to the top. She was the most downloaded woman on AOL when the internet first appeared in the mid-90s. Unbelievably popular was Sunny. And then the valet bit came back. So you go through these cycles of wrestling valet. And she is credited with being the first diva. The first diva, as they call it. So Sunny comes back, and she's popular. She's managing tag team. She's managing wrestlers. She's moving from gold champion to champion to champion. Whatever Sunny wants, Sunny gets. She's hosting the show. She's doing pinups. She's doing magazines. She's all over the place. Out of control, this girl. She was unbelievable in what she did. And you get also, around this time, of course, this is when WCW Monday Nitro starts taking off. Now, WCW didn't really do a lot with women's wrestling. The biggest contribution they had was back in the 80s in the AWA, another valet named Missy Hyatt, who was definitely the target of every wrestling fan's dream, such as Miss Elizabeth was. But Missy Hyatt definitely did that. She had Missy's manner. She had a show. She was more talkative than the women were. She definitely had that going for her. And then Medusa, a.k.a. Alundra Blaze, shows up on Nitro one night and prompts to throw the women's championship in the trash can in a very famous moment that got her blacklisted for 20 years from the WWE. 20 years. Just because Eric Bischoff was like, let's stick it in WWE. I want to drop the belt in the trash. And so they retired the belt after that. And really the only female presence you had on these shows was Sunny. Sunny was really the only one at this time. And then as it went on, the WWE kept getting more and more and more with it. First, someone like Sable. Sable showed up. Whatever Sunny built, she just took that ball and ran with it. There was nobody more popular in the Attitude Era than Sable. I guarantee And the women, you might give me Stone Cold or The Rock, but if you say that, Sable's number 3. Sable's definitely number 3. And basically, the women's division was revived to give Sable something to do because she came in with her husband, then husband, Mark Mero, who has been touted as being one of the worst Attitude Era wrestlers of all time, which is kind of warranted. There was even an angle where Mark Mero was jealous of how much attention Sable was getting and would force her to dress in burlap sacks and take off his robe and things, being very demeaning like that. And she would get back at him by just dressing skimpier and skimpier and skimpier, to the point where we got the infamous hand bikini in like 1998 or so. So it was that. So basically the division was revived to give her something to do. And then more performers came in. And like I said, it used to be wrestling valet, wrestling valet. Here's where the line tends to blur, where you got wrestlers who were legitimately tough, but could also pull off that sexier valet role. Some of the more technical side, you had the first women's champion of this era until the belt was deactivated in 2010, Jackie Moore. One of the best, one of the toughest women ever to lace up a pair of boots. Also Ivory in this era. Very much so, very, very big on that side. And then you had, and of course, one of the most legitimately tough women to come out in this time period, Chyna. Chyna was an anomaly. No one knew what to do with Chyna back then because she was a woman. She looked very buff, like a man. She was muscular. She had square jawline. People thought she was a man, but she wasn't. She was a part of this incredibly revolutionary stable called the Generation X. I don't have to go into why it was revolutionary, but it definitely was a precursor for the Attitude Era and stayed around with Triple H pretty much up until she left after surrounding a lot of random rumored circumstances. But we're not getting into that. We're talking about history, not rumor. So what we're talking about here is this sort of idea of what's going on. So that's what we're talking about. So you got these tough women, but then you've also got some more of the sexier, the more feminine sort of the woman, and that's going on here. Someone like a Terry Reynolds, who does show up early on as Marlena, the more masculine valet of Goldust, but then she takes on a sexy role as the She-Devil. And also Ryan Shamrock, you had a little bit in there with her, and the Cat, Miss Kitty, another sexy woman in there. She was actually the first woman to bare her breasts on WWE television. So you can see which side of the coin she falls on. All these women, I think, with the exception of Terry and Ryan, were eventually women's champion for a time. And the belt was passed around, but the matches were very short, usually 2-3 minute fare, consistent with Vince Russo's Crash TV style of matches, where the matches were rarely over one segment. Even the men's matches weren't over one segment. You had all these women coming. Deborah eventually appears as the valet of Jeff Jarrett, kind of sticks by his side. And then you get Jackie, and then you get women's wrestling stables like PMS, the Pretty Mean Sisters, Jackie, Terry, and Ryan Shamrock. And Sable and Deborah start having bodyguards like Barbara Bush, BB, or Nicole Bass, or people like that. You get the first ever stalker fan angle for the women with Tori, not Tori Wilson, Tori, who then eventually becomes in a relationship with Kane and D-Generation X, X-Pac. So you've got all of this foundation, all of this. So the matches aren't that long, but it's coming into effect. Even the Fabulous Moolah makes a return during this time period with Mae Young. Fabulous Moolah goes on to become the oldest living champion at age 76 and when she wins the title from Ivory for about a week. And Mae Young becomes the living embodiment of the dirty old lady, getting into situations with Mark Henry, and however often she's brought back. She was brought back while she was alive. Same thing with Miss Moolah, kind of presented in a more comedic, older light, as it were. Meanwhile, over at WCW, they didn't even have a women's championship. They had women's performers like Daphne and Tori Wilson and Stacy Keibler, Miss Hancock at the time. But the biggest involvement of the women was the Nitro Girls, a dance troupe. And a lot of them did come from that. Stacy came from that. A woman named Paisley, aka Sharmell, Booker T's wife, came from that. So it's this whole deal. This is the thing that women were used for, was purely entertainment, not wrestling, but pure entertainment. They wrestled a bit. Daphne did hold the Cruiserweight title with Crowbar as part of her new Hardcore Revolution stable with him and David Flair. But that's about it. That's really and Medusa held the Cruiserweight title as well. And they did have a woman named Asia, who was pretty much a carbon copy of Chyna. And even the names are similar. But that was really the extent of it. They didn't really do too much with their women. And then we get the late 90s, early 2000s. And this is where it really starts to pick up. Because you get a woman like Trish Stratus who comes in. Now, Trish Stratus, how you might see her today is much different than how she was back then. Today, she is a Hall of Fame 7-time women's champion who is considered the best professional female wrestler of all time. Back then, she was a fitness model who came into wrestling from modeling. Now, this is interesting because she came into wrestling from modeling. She was only meant to be a valet, scouting talent at the beginning, coming up with Test and Albert, giving the fans TNA. Not her own TNA, but Test and Albert. That's where she was coming from. And she was one of the many women that got put through a table by the Dudley Boys, but that's really the major physical involvement she had. She was friends with Stephanie McMahon, who also became a bigger part of this, starting as Daddy's little girl, but becoming a full-fledged woman in the McMahon-Helmsley faction, with her, even winning the women's title on an occasion. But Trish Stratus is definitely getting noticed, especially with her looks. You also get another woman who begins her trajectory around the same time, a woman named Lita, Amy Dumas. Now, she trained in Mexico. She came, I want to be a wrestler. This is what I want to do. I want to be like Rey Mysterio. We've heard the stories before of how no one took her seriously in Mexico until eventually she wouldn't go away. And so she got trained. And not only did she get trained to wrestle, she got trained in the lucha libre style, meaning that she can hit a moonsault and a hurricane rana and do one of those flippy-dippy arm drags off the top rope. So they paired her with, after working in ECW, I should say, she comes down and works in WWE. And her gimmick was she was paired with Essa Rios, and after he would win his matches with a moonsault, she would do the moonsault after him, proving that, yes, I'm tough enough to hang with the guys. That takes me over to ECW because they were really being used in the same way. There were cat fights all over the place. You had people like Dawn Marie and Francine and Beulah McGillicuddy and Kimona Wanalea and people like that who were very much in valets in the cat fighting. And then you have a woman named Jazz, who comes off kind of like how Jackie Moore or Lita would, as a legitimately tough, legitimately strong competitor who would pounce you out as much as possible. So it was very good. So that's kind of how that was. But again, WCW and ECW didn't have time to really develop a women's division because, well, they went out of business. And when they went out of business, you had Trish and Lita basically sitting at the top of the heap in here because Trish had the looks. Trish had everything with the looks. Sable eventually goes away. Deborah goes away. Jackie sticks around. Ivory sticks around. Terry, all these women do eventually stick around. But then you get Lita, who is legitimately wrestling and doing moves with Essa Rios and the Hardy Boys. And Trish, who's starting to learn, who's like, I want to learn how to wrestle. And one of the biggest female trainers at the time, or trainers of females, was Dave Finlay, Fit Finlay, as it were. The man who loves to fight, as he was known as in WWE, would train women. He was trained Trish Stratus. She took to it very well, as you can tell. She's an amazing competitor, very, very, very strong in her competition. Then people like Molly Holly show up. Jazz comes in. Stacy Keibler and Tori Wilson come in from WCW. So all these, there's this perfect storm that kind of takes place. You have this blend of the sexy with the athletic. It was how it used to be segmented. Now it's together. Starting the Attitude Era really came together now. So Stacy Keibler would perform. Tori Wilson would perform. They weren't the best in the world, were they? No. But they were still performing. Lita, excellent performing. Jackie, excellent performing. Molly Holly started off with the Holly cousins in a Romeo and Juliet love star-crossed lovers feud with Spike Dudley and the Dudley Boys. And she eventually gets with Hurricane, dyes her hair brunette, and becomes the epitome, then becomes the anti-diva of that generation. I'm not going to look sexy. I'm going to show my strength and my power through my wrestling ability. And that's where this came from. You get all this happening, and still, even at this time, Playboy shows up as a thing. Sable went into Playboy, Tori, Chyna, Sable and Tori, Candice Michelle eventually, Maria, all these women we haven't talked about yet. It's a big push, so there's still that sexy side, but the women can still wrestle. And they're being given not a lot of time, but still enough. It was really around 2002 that it really started to come together and explode, because you had the first Tough Enough happen in 2001. You had a female competitor come out of there named Nydia. Nydia was not the best wrestler, but she formed one of the most entertaining gimmicks of all time with Jamie Noble as a trailer trash couple. And Tough Enough started to bring in this new blood, and you got Linda Miles, a.k.a. Shaniqua, and Jackie Gata of that Jackie Gata match, which featured Trish. So that's what happens when you put inexperience in the ring, and it showed in Jackie's performance, or, well, lack thereof. But despite those sort of setbacks, you still had these great people who were still active, who came from the independents, who trained legitimately, who are from this old style, got the training that they needed. Trish was definitely up there. Lita, Jazz, like I mentioned. Ivory was still kicking. And then you get also Victoria, another former fitness model who was crazy strong. Her finishing move, the Widow's Peak, was one of the best moves of that era. And Gail King, another lucha-minded person who was into a lot more technical wrestling, such as submissions, things like that. First ever Asian Canadian in wrestling who won the title on her debut. And so you have all of these things, and you have your standards, your bra and panties matches, and your lingerie pillow fights, but you're still getting wrestling from the right sources. However, it was also around this time that two things happened. I'm going to fast forward to the year 2004. Two big things happened in 2004 that kind of shaped women's wrestling. The first thing was the first ever Raw main event featuring two women. Lita won the women's title from Trish Stratus on December 6th, 2004, and during the main event of Raw. It was a feud, years in the making. They were friends, they were enemies, back and forth, back and forth. Lita was mostly the good guy, Trish was the bad guy. They were just fighting and back and forth all the time. During this run, Trish was aligned with Christian and the problem solver Tyson Tomko as an insincere meddler in everybody's lives, including Lita's, whereas Lita was involved with that Kane abduction pregnancy angle that people most likely want to forget, which I do. But from where the angles were a little bit odd during this time period, I mean, who could forget the Al Wilson, Dawn Marie, Tori Wilson something triangle? I didn't even want to call it a love triangle. I'm going to call it something triangle because I don't know what was in there. The angles were weird, but you still got a main event. Huge, groundbreaking. The two most popular women in wrestling ever are main eventing, are the last thing wrestling fans see on an episode of Monday Night Raw. It was huge. It's a big honking deal. The other thing that happened at this time that also shaped how women's wrestling was perceived moving forward was the Divas Search. The Divas Search was a very interesting time period for this era. It was, you got Tough Enough, started getting more male competitors that are tough enough. So like, we want to find divas. We want to hire tens. We want models. We want people like that. That's coming back from that Trish Stratus era. Because if Trish Stratus can take to it so well, maybe we can find another Trish, another model person, another model, another actress, swimsuit model, lingerie football player, whatever it was, that can take to this. And so they scoured and they looked. They found models. They found Playboy girls. They found juggies from the Man Show. Remember those? Yeah, I do. And they found all these women, and they made them as boring as humanly possible in endless segments of Raw. The winner out of that was, of course, Christy Hemme. She would be followed by Ashley Massaro, Layla, and Eve Torres as women. But then you had a slew of other women come out of the Divas Search, whether they made the finals or the semifinals or just got a look. People like Melina, Candice Michelle, Michelle McCool, the Bella Twins, Maria Kanellis, Crystal Marshall, Maurice, Tiffany, all of these women that came out of this zone eventually got developmental deals and would go down to OVW or Deep South or whatever it was, or Florida Championship, and try to train. And sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. So there was that side. There was the model side. It's getting a lot of credit with Candice and everything. And you had the wrestler side with Victoria and Molly until she left after she got her head shaved. Or Trish and Lita and Mickie James, who took that initial fan stalker angle that Tori did with Sable to the absolute next level, involving a little homoeroticism in there, things like that with Trish. And that became a huge feud of that era. But then you get these women, and they're not given a lot of time to tell stories. Basically, the time is being given to Trish or Lita. Lita does take a back seat from wrestling. She does become a champion, but this is around the time of the Matt Hardy-Edge affair, and becomes Edge's valet throughout this process, while Trish becomes embroiled with these feuds with Candice Michelle and Tori Wilson and Victoria, Vince's Devils, and of course, Mickie James. And you see this kind of come about, and these folks kind of get to where they are. And so there's these valets that come in, like Melina and other folks like that. But then the biggest thing that I can say about this whole process is right around 2006, Lita and Trish retired within 2 months of each other. So the two most popular women are no longer a part of the company. Trish wins the title on her last night. Lita loses it on her last night, showing you how they portrayed those two women when it comes to that sort of thing. But then there's room for new people to take over. People like Melina, who started off as a valet, who had probably one of the sexiest entrances of all to get a character. Maria gets the character as the ditzy interviewer. Candice Michelle and Tori Wilson start to take off. Victoria's still around. Beth Phoenix starts to become a part of this. She quickly establishes herself as a glamazon. And Mickie James is still around, slowly dropping the psycho lesbian routine and becoming your standard I'm the tough chick baby face kind of thing. And so there's room for everyone to take over. And people are starting to learn a little bit more. Melina and what's her face? Beth Phoenix get huge with this. Candice Michelle, who was a model and adult film actress, takes off and improves so much in the ring that she becomes women's champion. One of the more improved wrestlers of 2007, I should say. Then you get but then there are still folks like the Bella Twins that come through, and Alicia Fox and Rosa Mendez, who for a long time did not have the best training, did not have the best wrestling skill. And then Michelle McCool and Layla form up in the late 2000s, that decade, as Laycool, and it becomes an incredibly hot Mean Girls angle that they were given. And you can see then they were being given that angle, feuding with Beth Phoenix, feuding with a newcomer, Natalya, who was of the Hart family, as everyone knows, feuding with Mickie James, Kelly Kelly. That's another one. I can't believe I didn't mention her until now. Kelly Kelly in the rebooted ECW was brought on as the age of 19 to be a stripper, basically to give that sense. And then you also had people like Francine and Trinity and other ECW performers of the day come in to be a part of that. And so she takes off. She doesn't have the best training either, but her and Eve as well still are doing things. And by the late 2000s, early 2010s, they're champions. They're taking this era. But it's still mostly dominated by these models who are okay, not the best, not the worst. Well, some are definitely pretty bad in the ring. And that's definitely something to think about. But then you got Natalya and Beth Phoenix holding it down. The Divas of Doom, as they eventually became. Karma comes in, the former Awesome Kong, who was told by JR that she wasn't going to pretty enough to be a diva, because of course we all know those were his marching orders to hire tens that could pose for Playboy. And as awesome as Kia Stevens is, that was not her body type, nor should it be, because she excelled well as a monster heel. And as I'm crossing through WWE, another division started to appear that was helmed by Awesome Kong in TNA, known as the Knockouts. You had Gail Kim, who defected over, people like Angelina Love, Velvet Sky, Madison Rayne. Eventually, Christy Hemme came over and joined up with them. Roxy Laveau was a part of that. I said Velvet Sky. Other folks were involved with building that up as well. But it was really the strength on Gail Kim and Awesome Kong's amazing matches. You also had cheerleader Melissa show up, a very, very accomplished independent wrestler who was known as both Alyssa Flash and Raisha Saeed. And then you had Raka Khan, all these other women, Sojourner Bolt, a lot, ODB, of course, show up in there. They create this big division. But then eventually, the advent of the Hogan Bischoff era, that kind of pulls down too. And you see people leaving like Gail Kim and Karma and folks like that. But Karma showing up was going to be huge. This was like China Reborn, Beth Phoenix 2.0. Strong woman who scared the crap out of everybody. For her, she had to leave due to a wonderful thing, a pregnancy, which unfortunately did not carry to term. Then you got other folks. Lay Cool breaks up. Divas of Doom form up. Alicia Fox is still around. The Bellas are still there. The Bellas kind of become the mean girls after Lay Cool leaves and taking this on. But through this opium, then NXT becomes a thing. And this is not the NXT of today. This is the reality competition where there was an all-Divas season. And the three biggest things to come out of there were Naomi, Caitlyn, and AJ Lee. Now, Naomi and Caitlyn, excellent performers. Caitlyn didn't have any training, and it showed. But she grew into a great performer. And AJ Lee became the girl next door of every nerd's heart, as it were. She did not look like your typical diva. She was like below 5'5", really skinny. But she could wrestle. She could lucha. She could do whatever she needed to do. Head scissors, submission holds. She was fantastic. And definitely became the most popular diva of the early 2000s. Had multiple WrestleMania matches. Got involved with some very big storylines. Married CM Punk. And then retired after that. But she had a great run with the company. And it's all started with NXT. There were still these models, this view of that these women were not really given the time. And it came from creative. You'd hear rumors that the creative was told to view the women as not faces or heels, just everyone's a little bit crazy. And everyone just wants to fight each other. How could you build a story off of that? You can't get a Trish and Lita if there is no defined heel and babyface and no reason for the two of them to be fighting. You can't get that. That would have never happened without that. The reason was the championship and their history. If you can't have that side of history, you can't do it. If you don't have that, it doesn't work. So then you got the Bellas switching from being face and heel every so often. You get Naomi wrestling Natalya, and then Natalya teaming with Naomi the next day. You get Caitlyn feuding with AJ, and then inexplicably being on her Survivor Series team due to the next phenomenon, Total Divas. You start to see a push toward it's Total Divas, a reality show, kind of detailing the lives of divas, a la Keeping Up with the Kardashians and other of these celebrity-focused reality shows. And the Bellas were a part of it. The Funkadactyls, who I didn't even talk about, Cameron, the first ever competitor eliminated from the 5th season of Tough Enough, gets a contract, and we're off to the races there. Natalya shows up. 2 new people, Eva Marie, who has become one of the most hated figures in wrestling, because people didn't think that she had the passion for it. She just kind of showed up to do it and was pushed way too early despite not knowing a single thing about wrestling. And JoJo, who had the same thing but then eventually bowed out to train and find her niche as an announcer. And then all these other women start coming on the show. You got Paige, Alicia Fox, Summer Rae, Rosa Mendez, All of these women start getting on Total Divas, and it becomes more about just random matches for the sake of the show than the title, which the title even changed throughout this. In 2008, 2009, there were two championships. There's a women's championship on Raw and a Divas championship on SmackDown. And you had folks like Maurice and Michelle McCool and Layla and Natalia and Maria all gunning for it, and Victoria all gunning for all of these titles. And eventually, Cool was the one that unified the Divas title, and that's the branding they wanted to go through. They had retired the women's title. With over 50 years of history, that title goes away to push this new diva thing. They're not wrestlers, they're divas. They're athletic, they're powerful, they're sexy, they know what they're doing in the ring, and they look like they could pose for Playboy tomorrow. That's kind of what they were looking at. Kind of worked, kind of didn't, because obviously they weren't given a lot of time in the ring, and they were not up to that snuff. Which leads me to the next major breakthrough, and that would be the revamped NXT. And you can credit the revamped NXT and the resurgence of women as wrestlers with story and skill to two people. On the wrestling side, you have a woman by the name of Sarah Amato. If that name does not ring a bell to you, maybe the name Sarah Del Rey does. And if that name doesn't ring a bell to you, go watch a few Shimmer tapes. Shimmer Women's Wrestling was a women's wrestling company that was kind of an offshoot of ROH, Ring of Honor, designed to be the alternative to the product of women's wrestling that you got today. So if WWE and TNA were giving you models, they were going to give you wrestlers. And a number of performers like Paige, like Natalia, like Beth Phoenix, like Paige's mom, Sweet Saraya Knight, like Sarah Del Rey came from this era. She's been called one of the best women's wrestlers of all time. And she comes in not to perform, but to train. She's never stepped foot in a WWE ring on television. She is just trained wrestlers, and she is training wrestlers. She's training the women like wrestlers, not like divas, like wrestlers. Actual moves, not just with the hair or the slaps or how it used to be. You can probably remember video games from the 2000s where every other finishing move for a woman was the slap or the low blow or a sit-out facebuster like X-Pac would do. Always like that. Just simple moves. And she was actually training women to get better. Women like Summer Rae was part of that first group. Emma and Paige were definitely part of that first group, that first wave of the Sarah Del Rey era. These were all, and Summer Rae was not an independent wrestler, but Emma and Paige definitely were, and they were being molded in this way. You get people who weren't necessarily wrestlers, also like Carmella and Alexa Bliss coming through around this time, and of course the four horsewomen: Charlotte, Sasha Banks, Becky Lynch, and Bayley, all of which, except for Charlotte, have independent wrestling experience and were heavily trained and inputted with by Miss Sarah Del Rey. Another person you can give on the creative side is Triple H. Like him or not, what he's done with NXT has been nothing short of wonderful, and he's been actually letting stories play out. You know, a rivalry of two baby faces in Paige and Emma. Which one is better? Which one is better? We always wanted to know. You had the genetically superior Charlotte, who split from the beautiful, fierce females to become champion and feuded with Sasha Banks and Summer Rae after that split. You have Bayley, who wants to prove herself as a tough person, who's going on her own kind of road to redemption like Sami Zayn did. I want to be the best, so I got to beat everybody that has beaten me. That sort of thing. And then Becky Lynch comes in. Takes a while to find herself, but she does. She becomes huge. And then you have all of these defined characters that are doing really well. Down in NXT on the main roster, you still get Total Divas. And then, one of the biggest things, these NXT women start moving onto the main roster. Summer Rae shows up as Fandango's dance partner. Emma shows up as Santino's girl. Paige shows up the night after WrestleMania 30 and takes the women's and ends a 295-day title reign of AJ Lee. And we're all like, Paige is here. Emma's here. This is going to go somewhere. Paige is going to have someone to talk to and wrestle with. She's going to have a great dance partner. And Paige, Natalya's going to move off the Total Divas crap and start wrestling again. Tamina's going to get better at her life. Naomi's going to do things. That's what we were hoping for, and it never really happened. We all wanted it to happen, but it didn't happen because they still weren't given the time. They weren't given the time to wrestle a match and tell a story and have a feud and have an angle. They tried with the Bellas. It was so close with that Bella explosion. They were very, very close, but it never took off because the acting focused too much on the story and they couldn't carry it in the ring or on the mic. And while that's going on, you get some of the best women's matches ever in NXT, starting with Paige and Emma. And once they leave, Charlotte and Natalya, Charlotte and Bayley, Charlotte and Sasha Banks, Charlotte, Sasha Banks, Bayley, and Becky Lynch. Sasha Banks, Becky Lynch. You get all these things, all these great matches on their takeovers. We might get another one with Sasha Banks and Bayley. So people are starting to see what's going on. Main roster divas are taking notice, with Brie Bella even saying, if I was down in NXT, I wouldn't want to be called up now. When someone is saying that, you know that in the words of Owen Hart, enough is enough and it's time for a change. And the poop hit the fan right after Fastlane. Around that time, after the Royal Rumble and Fastlane. Paige and Emma teamed up against the Bellas in a 30-second squash match that set the fans off. And the hashtag started, give divas a chance. Because they didn't want to see, why would you put that on your show? People wanted to see, they're starting to get more. They want to see these characters get better. They want more stories for them. They want more time. And slowly but surely, that started to happen. Now, Charlotte's on the main roster, being given 15 minutes. Becky Lynch and Sasha Banks have joined them. There are three Divas stables. Team PCB, Team Bella, Bad, Beautiful, and Dangerous. All these women have come out. NXT still holding strong, and you get this Divas revolution that takes place. All is a reaction to, we want our women to do more. We like looking at them, sure, but we want them to wrestle. It's 2015. We are done from the early 90s or the mid-90s where these women were just valets. Or the mid-2000s when they were models and they were good to look at, but they couldn't wrestle. We want to see them do it. They're here to wrestle. Let them wrestle. That's the sort of thing that has come up. And you can see kind of from these eras of, we have wrestlers. Now we have just valets. Now we have wrestlers again. Now we have just valets. Now we have both. Now we're going to lean more towards beauty as opposed to wrestling. Now we're going to lean more toward wrestling. Now we're going to try to marry the two things together again. And this is where we are. Who knows what the future holds? Know that we have a 6-women triple threat elimination match at SummerSlam. We have a Bayley versus Sasha Banks showdown that should do incredibly well. The Divas they've main evented at NXT. They've main evented Raw back in 2004. The goal that a number of them have represented is to main event a pay-per-view. And I sincerely hope that happens. I would love to watch that. With the matches, especially if it's someone like a Charlotte or a Becky or a Bayley or Sasha or even an Alexa Bliss, I would absolutely adore to see that. So now I'm going to give you guys some homework. You know that's what I like to do. I like to give you guys some homework. You can find most of these matches on the network, and if you can't find them on the network, you can find them on the internets, on the YouTubes. First one comes from December 6th, 2004. It is the main event championship match between Trish Stratus and Alita. Watch that. That's your number one. Also, I'm going to ask you guys to watch another fantastic match from this time period because I think it is a great time period. I'd like you guys to take a look at and just type into YouTube or to WWE. This isn't a match, it's just a look. Victoria. I think she was an incredibly underrated. She's a future Hall of Famer, no doubt in my mind. She will join the likes of Sherry and Moolah and Mae Young and Trish and Lita and Sunny and Alundra Blaze and Wendy Richter soon enough because she was phenomenal. Watch any of her matches. Watch her championship title match with Trish Stratus. That was a good one. And the third match I'd like you to watch just to see where this all kind of took place. Watch NXT TakeOver Rival the fatal four-way between Bayley, Charlotte, Sasha Banks, and Becky Lynch. People did not think that the women would be able to pull off a fatal four-way. They were even nervous about it, and boy, did they pull it off. Every single woman shined in that match, and I would definitely suggest that you watch it. So here it goes. That's your lesson for today. And please let me know in the comments what you'd like me to talk about next, what your next lesson is going to be. I am here. I have my own ideas, but I definitely want to hear from you guys as well. Any questions? Didn't think so. Class dismissed.